about to see the conversations of Valerie Amos and Professor Wole Soyinka. This is as part of the 100th anniversary of the School of Oriental and African Studies. SOAS has educated quite a few Ghanaians, some of them heads of state and some of them nearly heads of state. Professor Mills, Dr. Liman and Professor Dubois come to mind readily as some of those who have been educated in this college. Tonight, this is going to be a wonderful literary event, and in the background, you can hear the stage manager who seems to be announcing the arrival of Professor Wole Soyinka and Valerie Amos.
When I was a student, there was perhaps one single espresso machine, coffee machine, here at the time. Pasta.
You mean in the whole of Britain?
In all of England.
How can we preserve our heritage and our language and pass on to our children without still being British, but being Nigerian at the same time?
This language we're talking about is tied to apps. It's tied to the latest gadget. It's tied to useful or useless, leisure or learning, instructional. Its technology is taking over, and that is the part which alarms me. And we have to use opportunities like this to try and indoctrinate the young that don't lose the other language.
Professor Soyinka, thank you for a wonderful
conversation. In the year of our Lord, 1934, was a day the womb of Yoruba produced a great seed, the seed of Abiekuta, conceived in the days of Oyibo domination of the people of Nigeria. It came as an ordinary seed, but Akinwade, Oluwole, Babatunde, Soyinka outgrew Yoruba, and Yoruba gladly offered, and the world actually accepted the voice of history, the voice of time, a colossal edifice, an enduring intellect in Oluwole Babatunde Soyinka. For half a century, Professor Soyinka has been leading our thought towards humanity, our thought towards liberation. And indeed, he has taught us that thinking and thought is stronger and more powerful than the machine gun. So today, Professor Soyinka is here. Go on, we can't hear anymore. Abacha, we can't hear anymore. Mobutu Sese Seko, we don't know where he is. All the dictators in their booth have gone, most of them. But we can also hear the voices of some of them who have gone, but whose voices are singing in unison with Soyinka, because Soyinka is here. Can't you hear? Can't you hear Nelson Mandela? Can't you hear Steve Biko? Can't you hear Walter Sisulu? Can't you hear Dr. Kwame Nkrumah? Can you not hear Thomas Sankara? And can you not hear all the youthful African voices who are pointing to a greater tomorrow and who are excited, singing behind the voice of those who are gone and Soyinka who is here and pointing us to a greater African tomorrow? Akinwade, Oluwole, Babatunde Soyinka. Last night was a great event. You had a very hilarious response to the question from the Nigerian lady about how, as a second-generation Nigerian born in Britain, she wanted her children to get accustomed to the language of Nigeria. That was a very hilarious answer. You seem quite well connected with the youth.
It's only natural. One expects that there'll be some kind of continuity, and it's our responsibility to try and nurture that instrument, that agent of continuity, as much as we can. I think it's a natural instinct.
Given the date of this interview, it looks like we're going to have the first shot from you about your first impressions of what is looking like a success story in Nigeria, where the girls that Boko Haram had seized, some of them have been found. What's your view on that?
Depressing. Yeah, I know that's a contradiction in expectations, but when you consider the fact that we lost a great opportunity very early to have got all of them back within 1 week, 2 weeks, even a month, and that's the testimony of not only security, services opinion, but the opinion of the world. It's very sad that so many years later, and in obviously a traumatized condition, we have to rejoice that at least some of them are back. So it's that regret which is, which actually overwhelms what would normally be, as I said, a little bit of aperture of relief. I believe we let them down very badly. We let ourselves down very badly in the eyes, not just of the world, but of ourselves. That episode shames us eternally as Nigerians.
You blame the former government when they were arrested. Now some of them have been found. You are not particularly happy. Where do you put the blame now? Are you building up the blame from the old government to the new one, or who are you blaming?
Let's just say that we all failed collectively. Obviously, some have the responsibility far more than others, and the government, without a question, bears the government at the time. The head of the armed forces, head of security, in other words, President Jonathan, was in charge, and he must take 90% of the blame.
What's the state of affairs in Nigeria right now?
An arena of unprecedented drama. The tumulus is bursting, and all kinds of worms are crawling out of that tumulus. The long-hidden skeletons, not only peeking out by the toe, but by the entire cerements of their seeming permanent internment, and that is good for the nation. There's a convulsion. People have their own opinion about who's guilty here, who's being discriminated against here, who's a political victim, etc., etc. But all the various rotten ingredients which went into not only the collapse of the economy, but the debasement of what we call democratic processes, all of them are being exposed, and that's very healthy for the nation. There are positive things, of course, but I'm talking about the most dramatic. And for many people, it is something which is permanently elusive, that the moment of reckoning, that's what we're witnessing in Nigeria.
You have recently talked about Nigeria and its oil production, and you have expressed regret that Nigeria would have been a better place if they had not found oil at all. That's certainly controversial because Nigeria has some positive developments in infrastructure and in human resource development that you can obviously attribute to the wealth of oil that has been applied to the country. So if you take the oil wealth out of Nigeria that was found in the late 50s, there would be certainly negatives in the appearance of the country in its infrastructural capacity and in its millionaires, some of those millionaires that have been created in Nigeria. Do you think that you were too harsh in saying that the oil wealth in Nigeria the oil find in Nigeria was such a damning consequence?
I still insist on that. I don't think it's an exaggeration. I don't know that I would wish that the oil were never found, even if it were possible to turn the hands of the clock back. It's just a pity that leadership, there's nothing wrong with finding wealth. People dig for gold, minerals of all sorts, even in the midst of very generous nature, the material of which they could have directed, in other ways to establish at least what you might call basic securities, like food security in a nation. But coming suddenly on a pot of gold is it's not negative. It's a question of how you use it, how you succeed, how far you succeed in spreading the benefits of that sudden access of wealth around, not creating a small elite of over wealthy and therefore consequently alienated minority. you cannot say you found oil, the expression which I use very often because it's something very graphic in my head. It's an image which I've never erased, and since the first time, it's been repeated again and again and again, and that is to see human beings scrabbling in garbage heaps for food, especially children. That's an image which is just permanently engraved on my mind. So you cannot say you found a pot of gold and then you're living in, in luxury, and others are scrabbling on garbage heaps. That's exactly what, that's a contradiction.
So it's really a distribution of resource distribution has been the concern.
It has been misused, it has been abused, and it's the cause, isn't it, of even a lot of the unrest we're having right now, especially in the oil-producing area. If that oil had been used evenly to develop Nigeria, you wouldn't have new movements like everyday new movement, Nigeria Delta Avengers. After you've just been dealing with Bend, you created an amnesty program to bring in the former militants and so on. And now years later, what's happening? New groups are rising saying, too late, too little. Now we want a totally different arrangement. That's what's going on in the Delta right now.
I'm tempted to leave Nigeria and discuss other topics, but there's one more question for me. And people look at your successful thought leadership for the last century and how you have punctuated African history almost always in a positive way. The question is, and perhaps as an advice to others, why have you not ever stepped in the shoes of politics? After history recorded that you took up a radio station in the 1960s and did a broadcast, then perhaps you could have cascaded that into political leadership. You've never gotten into political leadership. One time you asked people to form a political party. They wanted you and you said you will not lead. Shall we say that that is one of the minuses to your career, that you didn't step in and do what you know has to be done when in fact you had the capacity to, when you had the popularity to? Why did you shy away from politics all your life?
Simply because of my habit of self-analysis. I do not think I have the temperament to play politics the way politics are being played, let's say in Nigeria, in none of our other places. And this allegation of holding up a radio station, it's not politics. It's a very, if it was true, that was a very specific intervention. It only happened to be a rather dramatic intervention. But all my life, I have been intervening one way or the other in politics. And in fact, it's not strictly true to say that I've never been tempted. I've been invited to stand election. And as a result of this sort of invitation and knowing that I couldn't, I didn't want to, I didn't feel I was temperamentally suited, I even then, as you pointed out, decided to form a political party for others. In other words, to use whatever prestige, whatever credibility is attributed to me, to use it actually to get a reliable representative of the kind of vision which I have for the nation. So that kind of politics is teamwork for me. It's not an individual thing. And once I was actually tempted, and I responded to another party, a young party, which asked me to lead. In fact, that party, one of those who approached me, became a very large, very powerful party. I wouldn't name which one. So taking part in politics for me is not necessarily taking position, what you might call formal position. One can actually exert a lot of influence by connecting with those who got there, or even just the process of ensuring that they got there, mobilizing my own, shall we say, followership, and saying, this is the person worth trying. Successfully or not successfully, it doesn't matter in the least. The important thing is to have participated according to my own, the agents of change in society.
So what kind of temperament is good for politics?
You've got to be far more flexible than I am. You've got to have more patience. You've got to be a great, gifted negotiator. I am not a great, gifted negotiator. I tend to act in a way in which I've been told is sort of take it or leave it.
So you are
kind of
dictatorial
mentality.
in a sense.
You know, power is a very delicate quantity. Power. One has to be very, very careful. I don't want to end up as those whom I violently criticize. And yet, such is the nature of society, its depredators, that I believe that sometimes undemocratic means are required to actually successfully deal with them. And I don't want to be guilty of that.
That's an interesting one. We'll come back to that undemocratic means when we talk about democracy. Just shifting away from Nigeria, but through Nigeria to Ghana, one name we all don't like to remember is General Sani Abacha. Happy that we've gotten over that period. In Ghana right now, there's a news story breaking and still on that our former president, Flight Lieutenant Rawlings, has admitted that he collected $2 million United States dollars from Sani Abacha in the days that Abacha was head of state. The Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice in Ghana is currently dealing with the matter. Mr. Rawlings believes that it does not represent corruption because the money was given and he apparently used it for some genuine purposes. Does this revelation surprise you? Do you have a view on this matter?
I made the accusation ages ago. I think I first made the accusation at the International Bar Association meeting. Was it Malaysia or Singapore? I can't remember, so many years ago, in which I expressed disappointment because I checked my facts. I always check my facts before I make any public accusation. And we, on the opposition to Abacha outside, had very solid proof. And at that, I used that international conference to charge that, the African Bar Association, I think it was African Bar Association, right? Anyway, Africans were heavily represented there, to ask them to make inquiries and make their results public. Because I felt, first of all, this is Nigerian money, and heads of states should not just be disbursing them anyhow without proper, accounting. And two, we were hurting very badly outside. We were being chased from pillar to post. Our people were being assassinated. Several were tortured to death in Abacha prisons. And we looked for solidarity. We traveled to the African continent. We were received by many heads of state. Some promised, never fulfilled them. Some just ignored us. Some just entertained us lavishly. And probably as soon as we turned our backs, said, look at those dreamers, those idiots. So we had a variety of reactions from there. And we also had very supportive, with one or two governments. And for me, it was very sad that next door neighbor in Benin, we could move and operate freely there, sometimes even with Abacha's security men who thought, in fact, sometimes we just call them and say, come and sit down here. We know who you are. You behave yourself, we behave ourselves, and you can go back and report whatever you want. And yet, further away in Ghana, we had to recall some of our people there to get out of there very fast. I told them graphically, I said, you will find yourselves in diplomatic bags being shipped on a plane and delivered in Nigeria to Sani Abacha. So for us to discover during that life and death struggle in which people like Nsara, we were lost their lives, to discover that a head of state was taking money from our arch enemy, an enemy of the continent, of the nation, of humanity. It was aggravating and very disappointing. So I was one of the first to announce this, to make this accusation internationally and ask about it to investigate it for us. So the aftermath, as usual, anytime an opposition cries, say, wolf, look at this man, a dramatist is always dramatizing and so on. Eventually, truth will out. That's all I have to say.
Who was your accusation against, Abacha or Rawlings?
Oh, against both, of course. Against both. But Abacha, that one was a spent case. He was spending money like what right, left, and center. He was buying support wherever he could. He was bribing wherever. So his own case was, was there. Me waste time on Abacha? No. I spent that time on Rawlings because he represented, at one time, one of the revolutionary voices through his actions in the African continent. Remember, I was in Ghana during that period stitching at Legon, and so I interacted a lot with some of the, even his own colleagues and some of the supporters in the opposition. So for me personally, it was a very grievous disappointment.
Let's move out of West Africa now and look at South Africa, for instance. If we're looking at the forward march of Africa, South Africa is an important country within the context. Jacob Zuma is about to leave office, and maybe Cyril Ramaphosa would become president of South Africa. This is our South Africa, your South Africa. Mandela terribly loved you. Do you have any views on South Africa going forward?
I think that this is not the South Africa that Mandela and others fought for. The scandals going on there are beginning to rival in Nigeria. The rise of xenophobia, violent, murderous xenophobia, encouraged even by some of the top politicians. All this is a great disappointment to all of us. At one time, I used to remember the expression. It's interesting, we're talking in SOAS here, which used to be the center of dreams for Africans, young African students, wherever they came from. And I used to use an expression I remember when I was young, and I was a student here coming down from Leeds during the long vacation to work in the railways and so on, earn a bit of pocket money and plot the future of Africa. I used to use the expression that the black Africa spins on a fulcrum. At one end, South Africa. At the other end, Nigeria. And in the middle, present-day Zaire. That in terms of resources, human beings, that if we could take care of that axis, that Africa would catch up with the rest of the world in no time at all. This is my favorite image of African development and futurist projections. And I think first the fulcrum, Zaire, collapsed under the weight of Mobutu Sese Seko and his shenanigans. South Africa then became the direction, the center of all our attention. From time to time, I reveal that our dreams at the time was to go down to South Africa and liberate South Africa. This is what we discussed, almost centered, everything at all centered on that vision. And then, of course, I said, Nigeria will take care of Nigeria eternally, and Africa would spin, be regulated, structured, and ever-escalating fashion. So to look at South Africa today, for me, is another sad perspective. And of course, Nigeria, I think I've said enough about Nigeria on so many fora. So it's a question of starting all over again.
You are not happy with what happened?
No, not today. Not today.
You're not happy with Jacob Zuma? You're
not
excited that Cyril Ramaphosa...
Oh, the scandals under his leadership. They're just too
yes, but looking forward, are you happy that Cyril Ramaphosa, one of the Mandela people who was fighting for liberation, could become president, even though he's now become very capitalist?
People change very often. This is one of the things we have to guard against as human beings. Power intoxicates the careless. People like Mandela are exceptions. They really are exceptions. That is why he's so much admired in the world, all over the world, not just in South Africa, not just in Africa. Somebody who refused to be intoxicated by power, and who decided when to let go of power, and not just let go, pretend to let go, and then continue to control behind the scenes. Like some of our people in Nigeria who think they're still president, and they still try to teleguide what's going on instead of allowing any new incumbent.
General Babangida?
I'm not going to mention any name. I'm just saying that is something which is to be condemned. Let's leave personalities aside for personal reasons.
I get it.
If I mention the name now, people say, oh yes, we know he hates this man. He hates this man. We know he hates him. He sees nothing good about him and so on. So let's leave it as examples, bad examples.
Let's go up to the north. And one of the stories that also punctuated Africa's history recently was the personal decision to set himself ablaze. Mohamed Bouazizi, the Algerian young man who set himself ablaze and then kick-started the Arab Spring a few years ago. The Arab Spring then ran through Algeria, through Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, and then eventually killed Colonel Gaddafi. What are your views on the post-Arab Spring Arab Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, who were critically, and Egypt, who were critically involved?
Dictatorship, whether just of the feudal nature, of the military type, or the quasi-wannabe civilian garb, dictatorship for me is intrinsically and basically a crime against humanity, in any form, in any age. But of course, we look more kindly on the past ages when, shall we say, human society, this human sense of political association was still primitive. Today, there's no such excuse. Whether it's theocratic or secular, I totally despise dictatorship. It reduces humanity. It condescends to the rest of humanity. The purveyors, the flag bearers of dictatorship are trying to play God. The Arab Spring was the first effective pinprick in the whole cult, in the entire cult of dictatorship, under whatever guise. And the way it spread was very cheering. It created optimism until it got bogged down in Libya and then in Syria, of course, today. Many people, when we used to decry dictatorship under whatever guise, white, black, pink, no matter what, they say, oh yes, these are the woolly-headed idealists, and sometimes they'd even accuse us of playing the game of the colonial master. They say, oh, because the West hated Idi Amin, therefore anybody who criticized Idi Amin was playing the game of the West. You know, that kind of simplistic and very self-corsetting approach to genuine brutality, you know, to the suffering of millions of people. Now, today, as you said at the beginning, where's Idi Amin? Where's Mobutu Sese Seko? Not even so much where is he, how did he disappear? Under what circumstances? Ennobling or disgraceful? Contrast the way of his departure with the departure of somebody like Julius Nyerere, for instance, or even the unfortunate Thomas Sankara. It's still better to die, I think, like Thomas Sankara, than to die the way Mobutu Sese Seko died. And that's the way we should look at power, look at the Arab Spring, that it pointed to a possibility, a re-establishment of the power of the people, the masses, as opposed to the power, the greed, the incontinence, and the inevitable corruption of an individual holding the entire reins of power.
Let's talk about Colonel Gaddafi, and he's been looked at in different contexts. So the apologists of neocolonialism believe that Gaddafi represented one of those strong anti-neocolonialist edifices that has now been crushed. Gaddafi also gave tacit support to the African National Congress, and Nelson Mandela did acknowledge that. Gaddafi was also at the forefront of the restructuring of the former Organization of African Unity, that is now the African Union. And so Gaddafi cast himself in the mold of some of the great leaders like Nkrumah and others. And that's why anti-neocolonialists think that Gaddafi represented something important. He was also brutally murdered. The allegation is that the West didn't like him like Amin, that America didn't like Gaddafi because of what he stood for. And eventually Gaddafi died and Libya is in shambles. How would you mark Colonel Gaddafi?
At the beginning, like many of them, started well. He was, at least he presented himself, and he was believed by many, myself included, as a genuine revolutionary, anti-dictatorship, feudalism at least. He removed a feudal king, and he was applauded. He took certain positions which were applauded enthusiastically by many third world countries. His assistance to African liberation was definitely genuine. You could quantify it, and in spirit, it was very laudable and very cheering. And then, of course, he went off the rails. He became obsessed with power, with control, total control. And he was, and he even turned out in many, many aspects to be a hypocrite. He was also, and we've got to be objective about this, he was also a religious fundamentalist. He had, and he announced as his mission, the vision of Africa as an Islamic nation. When we had even our problems in Nigeria, he said, part of the problems of Gowon, and Gowon was no friend of mine, and yet I resented that statement, that the problem of Nigeria was that it was not putting the Islamic struggle at the forefront of national policies. I've never forgotten that statement. I said, what insolence. So Nigerians have no right to choose what to believe and not to believe. And he was really obsessed by, and some of his alliances had to do with this mission of Islamizing Africa. The result was that he was ready to associate with any kind of disruptive movement. He intervened in Ireland. What was Gaddafi's business with the IRA, for heaven's sake? He intervened in many of the petty dictatorships in Africa, on this side of dictatorship, as long as they paid homage to his idea of Islamism in Nigeria. He's part of the problem we're having right now. He subverted, and I'm quoting diplomats who served, Nigerian diplomats who were on the spot and who served in that region and in Libya in particular. He subverted democratic processes in Africa. So he was a mixture. Unfortunately, I believe that in the end, the bad outweighed the positive. Look at his mission against drinks, for instance. He would wake up with a brilliant idea, he thought, but usually dramatic, when he went to the Nile and had an orgy of destruction of alcohol. Remember, everybody bringing bottles of whiskey and so on and smashing them. And then also musical instruments, Western music, guitars and so on, they all came in a bonfire of them. This was supposed to purge the African continent. When he died, what did we discover? Best of champagne, being drunk, with special goblets in his... many people will say, of course, this is Western propaganda. Look at the amount of booze which was wasted, for heaven's sake, to prove what? And in the end, the man was enjoying himself. At least his family was. I wasn't there. I don't know whether he drank. But the apartment of his daughter and so on, etc. Best drinks in the world. What is all that about? Why the hypocrisy? And that's the way I look at some of these leaders who consider themselves so pure that when they want to visit a country, they say no alcohol should be served at the table. Like this character from Iran, did in Italy. When you get there, hypocrisy, most of them. Any nature of fundamentalism in any religion, I consider total hypocrisy, because in the end, they have found out the evidence is there. So this was the mixture of this maverick. He was a charismatic character, and we will always be grateful to him for his role in the liberation of South Africa, for instance. And if I may just conclude with a small story, I remember Nelson Mandela on one side, Gracia Machel, Desmond Tutu, and myself on the other side at a dinner, criticizing Mandela for failing to criticize Gaddafi when the evidence of his crimes against the people became undeniable. And Mandela was a very stubborn person. Once he would say, yes, but you see, you have to understand when other people denied us, Gaddafi has stood by us, and I will not accept the insistence of the Western powers that we turn him into a pariah. And the three of us on the other side say, well, that is all very well. Do the people of Libya, the citizens of Libya, do they not deserve the kind of liberation that has come to South Africa? No. Anyway, etc., etc. That's how that dinner went. I've never forgotten it. And at the same time, I was very happy that we had somebody who insisted on recognizing and announcing, really publicizing and appreciating the help of a revolutionary like Gaddafi.
I have in my hand this book, All the Good Things Around Us, an anthology of African short stories, and it's edited by our own Ivor Ajimanduya, in whom we are well pleased. It brings me to my next question about contemporary literature and African literature and all of that. Now you are retired, and we're happy that you wrote the foreword to this book, Prof. What are we? Where is it? Where is African literature?
Alive and well, especially with the younger generation. That's one of the cheerful things which one can hang on to. There's a lot of talent coming out, you know, and especially the young women writers, which is a very positive sign of intellectual and creative development.
Will they get the support that perhaps you got? Are there structures to support that kind of thing, to get it into our cultural thinking and to get it into our development thought?
It's there. The support is there. If you see the number of literary clubs springing up in Nigeria, for instance. But if you're talking about government support, there's hardly ever government support for the arts. The art is the orphan of the productive energy of Africa. It's artists, writers, whatever they are, they unfortunately, and that applied even to our time, you know, they just have to fend for themselves, look for assistance outside sometimes, but somehow, and it's very difficult to sort of to criticize heavily. Priority is always given to material development.
Would you propose African governments set up 1-2% of GDP to support the arts?
I believe it is necessary. It's about time. I will try it. You know, there have been conferences in which we prove that the arts, in fact, are a great source of revenue for any nation, any serious nation. They are, and I'm saying this long before the promiscuous, quote unquote, Nollywood, Gollywood, Kennywood, and so on. These video film industry.
Can you describe that as promiscuous?
Promiscuous, yes, because it's everywhere, number one. The same theme is repeated over again in the most garish ways and so on. But if out of 100, from time to time, we get a gem, that is still progress.
What's the meaning of your name, Prof? Akinwade, Oluwale, Babatunde, Soyinka. What does it mean?
Akinwande, it means the bold one, the bold one, the brave one, Akin, the brave one had come home. The brave one has come home, seeking me. The brave one has come home. Oluwale means the Lord has entered the home. Babatunde, it means the father has returned. It means somebody, an elderly person in the family must have died around that time. So Babatunde means Baba has returned home.
You mean reincarnation of sorts?
Of sorts, yes.
Okay. And Soyinka?
Soyinka means I'm surrounded by sorcerers.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. We can't end this interview without talking about a phenomenon in global politics. Donald Trump has risen up in America on the back of what appears to be, and we discussed that last night on stage with Baroness Amos, you talked about it, what appears to be, in Ghana we call it Sankofa, which is to say, go back and pick it up. Go back and pick up what is ours. Something like that.
Yes.
It's going around the world almost.
Ultranationalism.
Ultranationalism, yes. We saw it here in Britain in
Absolutely.
the Brexit. Donald Trump rode on that and became the Republican nominee for the American election. He now stands at a stage where he is behind the polls, but you never know, he could win the American election. But that has been his battle cry. What is your reading of the American politics of today? Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton.
Well, my own position is very simple, personal. You know, we have, again, politician, or militrician, as they call them, ex-military, who's a head of state. And when the house of cards, which he built, was collapsing around him, and he realized that the game was up, he decided to leave the party in a very dramatic way. He called for his party card, and he ripped it, you know, in public to say, this party which he himself set up. He was not a part of it. Now, I have a green card. The day Donald Trump becomes president of America, I will take that card, call a press conference, and I will cut the green card to pieces, and they will never see me in America again.
But why? Because
I shudder to think what America will become if mind, I mean, I was going to use the word mindless, but actually he does have a mindset. If you have a mindset, it doesn't mean you're mindless. But outside of that, he sees nothing as existence, that mindset. And that mindset is a very negative, a lager kind of mindset in which push everybody out and let us squat on what we have and let that grow and push everything out of the way. It's a very simplistic reading of what the world is today. The world coming together on so many levels, and humanity trying to heal some of the global crimes of the past, especially towards the so-called third world, by keeping at least adopting a policy of openness, kind of openness to the rest of the world. And then somebody comes along and wants to turn the hands of the clock back, and very often thoughtlessly, because he's even reversed some of the things which he said earlier when he realized it wasn't getting him much mileage. So that sort of person is very dangerous. And America has a lot of power. To think of somebody like Trump in charge of that power, listen, thank goodness I'm not an American citizen. I'm just a permanent resident. My bags are always ready, packed. If his election finds me in America, look in the planes. I'm the first to get on board. I'm getting out of that place.
Well, I have to thank you for this interview, Prof. And I grew up in Ghana, and so in the middle 80s, I was still in primary school, so we could hear the international news, and we didn't understand it, but the names were always Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Perez de Cuellar, etc., etc. And we were heavily motivated when the first time we had an authentic African name in the international news in the first 3 headlines was in 1986 when they announced this Nigerian professor whose name we couldn't remember but who had won the Nobel laureate. It made a big impression on us in those days, those of us who were 9 and 10 and 7, that Wole Soyinka, a Nigerian, is in the first 3 lines of the international news instead of Perez de Cuellar and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. I believe people of my generation, that impression has stayed with us, and that Nigeria was so close we could relate to it, and it gave us a lot of possibilities. Thank you very much, Prof. I didn't know many years later I'll be interviewing you, but I thank you for this opportunity. And
Great
it's a
talking
pleasure.
to you. Thank
Super.
you.
Thank you so much.
Right.